Hello, everyone, and welcome to the With Chinese Characteristics podcast. I'm Natalie.
I'm Cherry.
Together we talk about topics with Chinese characteristics, whatever those might be. Cherry has a topic for us today.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, at least I hope you do. Otherwise, it's going to be a short episode.
This concludes the end of the episode. Yeah. So our topic today is the Great Tea Heist. So I want to start with this. Natalie, you know that I love botanical gardens.
Do I?
You know this.
Oh, I do?
For the past few years,
I know this.
The pandemic included, whichever city we visit, I look up the botanical garden.
What's the first botanical garden you've been to? I'm going to challenge this assumption.
Well, maybe the Denver one.
Okay, so you've loved botanical gardens for roughly 12 months.
I've been to the LA one many years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know you love botanical gardens about as much as a normal person loves botanical gardens, I think.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today.
Considering you've been to 3 in your lifetime.
This is a bad narrative.
No, it's not.
Okay, I acknowledge.
You hold a standard amount of love in your heart for botanical gardens, considering I think most people, if they're pro or con botanical gardens, they'd say, I'm favorable towards botanical gardens.
But I'm slightly more favorable.
Okay.
I do look them up. You do know this.
That's true.
I did make you go to one with me.
I did. You did.
Not long ago.
So you're not world's greatest botanical garden fan, but you do like them.
I do like them.
Okay.
They have a special place in my heart.
Recently.
I'm a champagne socialist when it comes to botanical gardens.
Okay.
I like thinking that I like them. Okay. So today.
You want to be the kind of person who can walk into a botanical garden and know things about the plants.
Yes.
Okay.
So nowadays, botanical gardens missions are all about biodiversity, sustainability, conservation, education, inspiring people to protect the nature world.
Yeah.
All very wholesome stuff.
Expensive souvenir shops.
Sure. Or that, right? Arts and crafts.
Yeah.
However, though, when I said our topic today is the Great Tea Heist, the second part of our title is, by the way, this is subject to change because I haven't made up my mind, but
you'll see what the title is when you look at the podcast and the thing.
Yes. But at the moment, I'm thinking it's going to be Botanical Imperialism with Colonial Characteristics.
Okay.
And shall I just say, you will never see botanical gardens the same way again after this episode.
I'm going to reserve judgment on that.
Okay.
I'll accept your hypothesis, though.
Sure. So let's talk about tea, because it is the tea heist.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2021, tea is still the second most consumed drink in the world after water. According to the UK Tea and Infusions Association, 84% of the British population drink tea and herbal infusions every day. Approximately 100 million cups daily. Do you know how many cups of coffee they drink daily?
More than 100 million?
No.
Oh.
70 million.
Okay, I was assuming it was going to be one of these things like Baijiu is the most drank spirit in the world, and it's because nobody drinks Baijiu but Chinese people, and they're bringing up the average.
No, but as much as coffee is on the up and up.
Okay.
Tea is still
all right.
Has the throne.
Okay, tea has the throne.
Yeah. So tea production in 2015, China produced 2,230,000 tons. India, it produced more than 1 million tons. And Kenya was the third, was about 400,000 tons.
Okay.
So it's fair to say that even though China's still the first one in the list, it's fair to say that we no longer have the monopoly on tea like we did way back when in the 1800s.
Yeah.
And China has been producing tea for a very long time. And it popped up here and there in travelers' accounts in Europe after they had traveled to China. For example, Marco Polo had mentioned tea taxes in China.
Yeah.
So by no means it was unheard of.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Tea seems older in Europe, but actually coffee came first. That coffee was popular before tea was in Europe because coffee came from the Middle East, which was closer.
Yeah, well, tea came from China.
Yeah, hard to get there. And the book Navigations and Travels, published in 1550, pretty early, by an Italian geographer, and I'm sure I'm butchering the name, but it's Giovanni Battista Ramusio. We don't get to say a lot of Italian names on this podcast. This is Natalie saying Chinese names.
I know, but we don't get to say a lot of Italian names on this podcast, so I wanted to try it.
I think that was good. You did the hand motions when you were saying it, which is
okay. That's a stereotype. I do hand motions all the time as a Chinese person. Chinese people perfectly capable of doing lots of hand motions. At least me. So anyways, the book was a collection of other travelers' accounts. Giovanni himself apparently didn't travel that much, but he was like the editor of the book.
Okay.
It described tea in detail. Quote, they take that herb, whether dry or fresh, then boil it well in water. 1 or 2 cups of this decoction taken on an empty stomach removes fever, headache, stomach ache, pain in the sides or joints, and it should be taken as hot as you can bear it.
So this is not traditional Chinese medicine. This is just Chinese medicine at this point.
Exactly.
Tea.
Yes. And he said, the traveler who gave the account, not a Chinese person, said, besides that it was good for no end of other ailments which he could not remember, but gout was one of them. Quote. So pretty mysterious, fantastical, in my opinion, descriptions of tea at this point. And then not that long after, the first European report of tea back in an official manner was by a Portuguese Jesuit, Father, again, might be butchering it, Jasper da Cruz, in 1560. He went to China on the first commercial trading trip from Portugal. Portugal was the first European country to trade tea back to Europe. They began trading tea from China to Holland, France, and the Baltic. And then Holland and Portugal went to war in 1602. The Dutch East India Company and the Dutch West India Company invaded Portuguese colonies all over the world. I wanted to mention this because, it's colonial powers doing colonial things.
Yeah.
And this means the Dutch began importing teas themselves. And at this point, tea was still very much an expensive drink, so that only rich people got to drink it. But over time, in the late 17th century, you can find tea in common shops in Holland and other parts of Europe.
Yeah.
And in 1662, the Portuguese princess Catherine of Braganza and Charles II of England got married.
Yeah.
And this princess loved tea. And Charles apparently grew up in the Dutch capital as well. So they brought the tea to the royal court in England, and drinking tea became a high-class symbol.
This was after the English Civil War, right?
Is 1662 after the English Civil War?
Yeah.
Okay, then it is.
Yeah.
And the princess had also influenced the posh people to desire better quality tea rather than just any tea from China. And it became a classic, enjoyable thing to drink. And before this, tea was mostly thought of as a medicine, just like opium.
Or tobacco.
And also before this, the Dutch East India Company took all the business, and the British East India Company didn't really import tea to Great Britain until 1669. Okay. So they were a latecomer in the game from that perspective. But once they started, it grew from there. To what you said about coffee earlier, at the same time, though, France grew a taste for coffee rather than tea pretty soon. But tea in England became more and more popular and was here to stay.
Yeah, I think it's I could be wrong, but I think it's partially a geopolitics thing because, coffee was from the Middle East and France has, ports in the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Right? So they can trade directly there.
Yes.
Whereas, England can get it cut off. So.
Yeah. I mean, you don't think the East Indian Company wanted everyone to drink tea and promote it because they're the ones who will get rich on it. So Dr. Samuel Johnson, a famous British writer, he said, quote, with tea amuses the evening, with tea solaces the midnight, and with tea welcomes the morning. Quote. And I was thinking that's a lot of caffeine.
There's a theory, I think I've mentioned it before, but which I rather like, which is one of the things that jump-started the scientific revolution and all these things in Europe was the advent of boiled caffeinated drinks. Yeah. For people to drink during the day instead of booze in cities. And so, people got more done. Because before, a lot of cities,
everyone's just drunk all the time.
You go to a restaurant, you're not going to drink water, right? Yeah. So you drink booze, right? You have wine, you have beer, right? Because what else are you going to drink? And then, but now it's we'll have some tea, we'll have some coffee.
So not everyone's a high-functioning alcoholic, as you're saying.
No.
If the whole population drank booze throughout the day, it's not going to get much done.
Everybody's buzzed a little bit.
Yeah.
And then now everybody's on tea.
Well, maybe that's why everyone was chill back in the days. Yeah. I don't know if people were chill back in the days.
They were not chill.
That's a false claim. Sorry about that.
I think history will show that some people were not chill.
No. Anyhow, though, at this point, it's not just the high class. It trickled down. By the 1790s, it was estimated that the regular laborers, everyday laborers in Britain was spending on average 10% of their food budget on tea and sugar, which goes hand in hand because the British, they drink tea with their sugar, apparently.
Once again.
Which is a crime, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But
Once again, though, Cherry.
yeah.
Just like opium, right? Started with rich people, then poor people started using because they could work harder.
Exactly. And throughout all this, China was still the only place in the world that exported tea. It's not the only place that produced or drank tea. It's,
Yeah.
Japan had tea, Korea had tea at this point.
Yeah.
India had Indian tea. Britain bought tons and tons and tons of Chinese tea. After 1750, the British imported over 10 million pounds of tea per year.
Yeah.
And because tea was heavily taxed by the British government, lots of it was also smuggled into the country. But nevertheless, the tea business in Britain was essential for the national economy at this point.
And it basically funded the conquest of India.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's how the East India Company got money.
Yes. So in 1772, apparently there was a revolt by the working class against paying the high taxes on tea. And as a result, the stock of the East Indian Company fell and the British government reduced the tea tax as a response to help out. And I think that was the original, in my opinion, maybe too big to fall story. But
Yeah.
I'm sure there were others.
Too big to fail.
What did I say?
Too big to fall.
Well, I mean,
Close enough.
yeah. Anyways, the West couldn't sell anything to China, though, throughout this time. Not much. And
Which we've talked about in the kind of prequel to the Opium War and some other episodes.
yes, we had no use of the barbarians'
Yes.
goods. And that presented a big problem because now we have a trade imbalance.
Yeah.
And between all this money they're spending on Chinese tea, Chinese silk, all these other
Porcelain.
porcelain, I guess the East Indian Company.
Yeah.
Or the empire figured out, oh, there's something we could sell.
Yeah.
Opium.
Yeah.
And I wrote here that you thought we were done with opium in this podcast. No, but we mentioned opium inevitably already a few times. So
Yeah.
that
I
doesn't
feel
really
like
work.
you can't any talk of China like 1800 to like
Yeah.
1950. You can't.
You got it.
Opium's gonna have some sort of
1950, 1850.
No, 1950 probably. Opium was Communist Party was
Until 1950.
Yeah, the Communist Party was selling opium even after 1950.
Yeah, well, that's not part of the official history. So tea, basically, this is the trade situation now. China sold tea to Britain, among other things. Britain, through the East Indian Company, and later through everyone after they didn't have the monopoly anymore, sold opium to China in return. And by the middle of the 19th century, China was not having it anymore. Famously, Lin Zexu destroyed all of the opium he could get his hands on,
Yeah.
which was a lot in Canton in 1839. The Opium War happened. We did
Yeah.
a few episodes on it. Britain thought, oh, we need to take the tea monopoly away from China because
Yeah.
the relationship is not so good, to say the least. The other fear was that if China just legalized opium and started planting it domestically, which was a real consideration at that point,
Yeah.
then England would once again have nothing to sell to China.
And that's what they started doing. And even Lin Zexu at certain points was like, maybe we could just make it ourselves, right?
Yes.
And then it's
At least we'll solve the economical problem.
yeah.
Not the drug problem.
No, but the taxes problem. But no, tea was, I believe it was structured as it was considered a strategic commodity for the UK, so it was like up there with like gunpowder,
Yeah,
and like iron and stuff.
of course. Yeah.
That the supply couldn't be interrupted.
Yeah. And it's not, it's strategically, but also culturally, to drink tea at this point is to be British. Or to be British is to drink tea, which
Yeah.
I find fascinating because none of it was ever produced in England and they had no idea of how it's made.
Yeah.
And lots of people also didn't have any idea that black tea and green tea are the same tea. They're just processed differently. Like, you know nothing about this thing.
I mean, but that's like saying like, oh, if Americans can't have their morning coffee. And it's like, well, we don't make the coffee. I mean, we make a
That's
little
true.
bit, probably, right? But it's
Well,
like,
at this point, you do know about coffee.
I
don't
know-
know if coffee was ever...
no, most people I think know. Do you know the most? I mean, the two most popular coffee places I think still are McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts, right? Most people know what coffee is. It comes in a cup and they drink it, and it better be there in the morning.
But I don't know if you could ever say to drink coffee is to be American. You could very much say that about...
No, but people would be very unhappy.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
that's me. Without my daily caffeine, I'm very unhappy as well
Yeah.
and grumpy. But sure, point taken.
Yeah. It's not rare, right? For an imported good to be. I mean, I have playing video games as part of my my identity, Cherry. And we don't make the graphic cards here in the
I
United
guess we
States,
don't.
I'll tell
No,
you that.
I guess you don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, so all the opium money, though, and the tea money was fueling the British economy. So Britain had to figure something out. Now we're at war.
Yeah, and also during the standoff with over the opium with Lin's issue, there was no tea trade for like a year.
Mm-hmm. And that was a problem.
Yep.
Yeah. So they looked to their colonies, and India was the place to pick if they had to grow their own tea. Why?
No, it's just making me think of like Mitt Romney and his thing. He's like, I've got binders of women, and it's making me think like binders of colonies.
No,
like,
exactly, 100%. Like look at the world.
Some British guy in a wig pulls out a thing. He's like, all right, what do we got here?
Yeah,
I
know. So tea was growing in India for years,
yeah.
particularly in the Assam area. And British botanists suggested that Chinese tea could be grown in northern India successfully, back as early as the 1770s, which was a long time before the Opium War ever broke out.
Yeah.
But this idea at the time wasn't pursued because, the tea trade from China was very profitable. East India Company was getting happily fat and rich from it. And it's not like the British knew how to plant and produce Chinese tea anyways.
It's just like today. Cheap plastic crap and electronics and stuff.
Yeah.
Everybody's getting rich.
Yeah.
It's like, well, we could make it here.
But then the capitalists will make less money.
Yeah, but
Walmart will make less money.
And China will sell it to us, so there's no hurry, right?
Yes, right. And it doesn't help that it was forbidden for Chinese citizens to teach foreigners about growing, like methods of growing and processing tea. But really, I was thinking, you know what? At this point, the Chinese citizens were forbidden from teaching the other people like Chinese.
Yeah.
So, and anything else whatsoever.
Well, I was looking up the Qing legal codes for one of the other episodes, and it's interesting. So when George Staunton translated it, who was like the chief superintendent of trade for, he wasn't the chief superintendent, but he was basically in charge of the East India Company in China for a number of years.
Yeah.
And when he translated it, the law codes, there's basically nothing about foreign trade in them because it really wasn't a big thing.
No.
Until
it didn't exist.
Fairly late in the game.
Yeah.
And but so the penalty, it's interesting, there's much harsher penalties and much more details on smuggling salt and the salt tax than there is on tea, because salt was the big internal tax thing that everybody, they made their money on. And they're basically, the only rule for tea is like it's the same as salt. They basically say same penalties as salt, which is like
it's a protected good.
Yeah, you might get beaten, you might get exiled, you might get fined. And if you go to a tea plantation and you buy fresh tea, you can sell tea with an expired license. But if you go and try and buy fresh tea with an expired license, you're in big trouble. Want to know something else though?
What's something else?
So I just find it funny. So they obviously mention, in this patriarchal Confucian society, there's different penalties if you're smuggling tea as a woman.
Oh my God.
Than as a man.
Oh my God.
But
Let me guess which one's heavier.
Well, it's not what you might think.
Oh.
Right? So basically they're like, okay, if there's a woman who is smuggled tea and she's in and her husband and her sons are in the household, no mention of daughters, then they get punished and she doesn't.
Huh.
Because they're like, you got to keep a handle on your woman.
Yeah.
You let your woman go smuggle tea, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
But then they do say if
there's
the woman there's no husband and the sons, again, no mention of daughters, are of a tender age.
Oh, okay.
So if they're of tender age,
okay,
like a tender chicken,
sure.
young, then then they don't get banished. They only get fined.
Okay.
So it was like funny.
No, but if they were not of tender age,
well, then the sons get
adults,
it.
They get
the
they
sons
get the
take the
responsibility.
punishment.
Yeah.
They got to keep a handle on their
What
mom.
if there's no male relatives in the family?
I mean, is it a family then, Cherry?
Well, what if she just has no male relatives?
Is it a family then at that point?
Well, no, but like, would she just herself get the punishment?
I guess she's just a person then.
Okay, but she would get the punishment.
Probably, yeah, because it's not a family.
Okay.
Just a woman and a daughter, Cherry. Is that a family?
Well,
no
clearly
son?
not in the eyes of Imperial China.
Right? Come on.
or today.
No family line,
No. Yeah. So, well, I would argue there is a family, but not a patriarchal family.
Yeah, I'm joking. Cherry.
I know you were joking.
Yeah.
Well, it's worth mentioning in China, there was no like national tea factories or corporations.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have like an East India Company. It's not a coordinated effort. It was an effort because everyone in China drank tea. It's a big business. but really it was very grassroots. Is farmers, be it a family or a small group of them, they grew tea on small plots of lands, and then they harvest them 3 times a year, and then the fresh tea leaves are purchased by many local merchants, and the merchants then process the tea and then organize the tea to be transported, most of the time carried on the backs of laborers across the country, and then they get to the bigger cities, to the next level of distributor, and then they get tasted and they get, in a way, ranked and bought, and then if they were to be exported, they get transported to Canton to be traded. So not much transparency in the whole process, especially you're a foreigner.
Yeah.
There are only limited a number of places you can go to.
Yeah, there's
and
the
people
Hong
you can talk to.
There's like the Hong merchants. I think there's like 10, and basically, you know, you gotta form a relationship with them, and you basically kind of just have to hope that they don't cheat you.
Yes.
Because you know you can't you can't open every box of tea and try it, right? I mean, in the accounts from the Westerners, it was like you really had a leg up if you actually were friends, if you actually had a good relationship with the Hong merchant, one of them, because then they would make sure you got the best stuff.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, just like business anywhere.
Yeah. But it's very personal because there's only so many of them, and so you got to kind of make friends with one, or you kind of get mediocre tea.
Mediocre tea. How could the posh people drink mediocre tea? I mean, how would they know? They put milk and sugar in it. It's you know, they dress it up. Anyways, it's fine. I will stop complaining about that. Anyhow, so the whole process very mysterious for a foreigner. And all those aspects aside, one particular complaint I've heard was very interesting because this was described elsewhere, but also in the book do you know what I'm about to say? Also in the book called For All the Tea in China by Sarah Rose.
I'm sorry, just gonna laugh. It makes me think of when you're a kid and my parents asked me, oh, where does milk come from? And I said, the grocery store. And it's like, I was like, I have no concept that there's this animal that the milk comes out of.
Yeah.
I just see it in its packaged form.
I know.
Already been through the process at the store. And that's all the British people saw.
I know.
Like tea could come out of a tree.
Yes.
For all, you know what I mean? It's just, you only see the little.
That's my argument earlier if the 5-year-old you had said, to drink milk is my identity and it comes from the grocery store. They made it. It's fine.
They have this thing, but they only interact with the processed version of it.
Yeah.
And they kind of just have ideas of where it might come from or how it's processed. But it's just like, where does tea come from? I don't know, Canton. Like it.
Yeah, exactly. East Indian Company.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this will speak to that. Described in the book, For All the Tea in China by Sarah Rose, quote, even the names for tea were enigmatic. Lark's Tongue, Dragon's Well, Jade Girl Peak, Looking Glass Rock, Water Tortoise Stones, Rock of Three Monks. Were these green tea or blacks? How could one label them for the market with such descriptions? And, it was just a big frustration. They're like, how would I ever know what a Twin Peak was? And I was just thinking, I get that it could be very confusing, but really it was not an effort from the Chinese to confuse the British. That's just how we like to name things.
I mean, that's how everyone likes. I was about to say, put this person in front of a modern craft beer aisle.
Oh my God.
And it's like, okay, what does,
allow my bourgeoisie statement for a second. I love sour beer.
Yeah.
And the only way I know if they said sour on the label, and you know what? Most sour beers, the word sour is not found anywhere on the packaging. How would anyone ever know? I guess you just gotta
know, Cherry.
You gotta have the insider knowledge.
Just like the tea.
Just like for the Chinese tea. Yeah. Now, with the China-Britain relationship getting worse and worse, the British picked up this idea that was raised over 70 years ago, that they could grow tea in India. Mm-hmm. And in 1839, British investors formed the Assam Company and started trying to build a tea plantation out of India in the Assam region.
That's right when the Opium War is kicking off, so I'm sure
they were not wasting any time. Yeah. So this time, the British hired a few Chinese people, supposedly tea masters, to go to Assam, but that never took off. And it was questioned whether these Chinese people did know much about tea. And apparently, even though they weren't supposedly very cooperative with the British. But that's from the perspective of the British.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I bet they probably just assumed it's probably like, they're a Chinese person. They know how to make tea.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're all experts of all aspects.
Yeah.
Because we're so mysterious and knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Even though lots of money was poured into this project, it turned out to be a failure. No profit was really ever made. No good product came from it.
And I think also once it's just hard because China has such an economy of scale with tea at this point, and there's so much of it. It's like as soon as it starts trading again after the war, like any little tea plantation you have in India is not going to be as efficient as China.
Yeah, it won't be able to compete.
No.
So that was the first try, but they didn't stop there, of course. The British East India Company had been considering this for a long time, and as early as 1834, they sent someone as an employee to China, just a regular employee to China, to collect plants and seeds of tea. The man was called George James Gordon, and he got 3 batches of the tea seed, but apparently he wasn't there to oversee the selection of seeds, and the ones that eventually arrived in India were so terrible and nothing had survived. So again, complete failed attempt.
I wonder if the Chinese people were in on the joke. They're like, these are the best seeds.
Well, here's the problem. Oceanic transportation was hard. It was tough on anything, right? Especially plants, and there were special things you have to do, which they figured out to store the seeds in containers and just let them germinate during the trip was the best way to do it. Like, if you just transport a plant, it's not going to survive.
Okay.
Apparently, but anyhow, nothing survived through this.
Yeah.
And they still didn't give up, and they decided to take this mission again. And the second time, they had a different strategy. I mean, same strategy, the core strategy.
Steal the tea.
Same core strategy as, like, we have to steal the tea, but different ways to do it. It was a different criminal assistant in mind. And this time, they decided they're going to send a botanist, an expert, a man called Robert Fortune, because this job can't just be done by anyone. It can't just be done by a regular East India Company employee. It needs to be a plant hunter, a gardener who knew what they were doing, but also a thief, a spy, someone who knows China.
Okay.
And Robert Fortune was the man.
So if James Bond was a gardener.
I guess so. Yeah. And tea, before we get into the details, tea definitely met the definition, in my opinion, and lots of other people's, met the definition of intellectual property at this time. It was a commercial product. It was of very high value. It was traded day in and day out on the international market. And it was manufactured using a unique formula and process, which is tangible creation of the human intellect.
Yeah.
And in this case, the Chinese people.
And it was selectively bred, so the variants of it were...
Oh, yeah.
It
was a human effort. Yeah, proprietary. And China had intentionally protected that secret with very tight lips.
It wouldn't be the first time, because if I'm recalling correctly, the Byzantine Empire also snuck into China. Well, the Eastern Roman Empire snuck into China and smuggled out silkworms inside like writing pens or something.
Yeah.
And started growing silk in the Middle East. So
yeah.
So China's got to watch. These foreigners are coming and stealing their secrets. Well, they can't trade tea in China anymore. But so actually, that's actually probably really why they're stealing the tea.
Yeah.
Is because in 1834 they lost their mandate to trade tea in China.
Okay, you know what? That only makes it more of a criminal act. It's not even for the British people.
That would make sense.
It's just for themselves.
Yeah, that would make sense. 1834, because that's when they lost their mandate.
Yeah.
So now they're like crap. We got to get
Clock
this.
ticking.
We got to get this product back.
I know. Let's talk about Robert Fortune real quick. So Robert Fortune came from humble beginnings, not a lord by any means, and didn't come from any significant money. His father was a hired farmer, and he didn't have a doctor's degree. He worked as a gardener, had a love for nature, and he didn't go to any prestigious universities for anything, but rather he learned his skills from practice of professional apprenticeship. He got a first-class certificate in horticulture and a trade qualification, and he started working in the Botanical Garden at Edinburgh. He was Scottish. And later at the Royal Horticultural Society's garden in Chiswick. And he was particularly good at cultivating orchids, hothouse ornamentals.
Like greenhouses.
Yes. Which apparently was basically Chinese oriental plants at the time.
It's all the rage.
Yes. So they decided that he's the man to be sent on a trip to China. Not for tea at this point, but just a general finder's mission.
Okay.
And what's interesting about the career path of a botanist at this time is that before this, I mean, even during this time, it's not really a job that someone takes. It's, it used to be planters, men on their knees, just working the garden. But by the 19th century, botanists were no longer humble men working in the fields all day, but rather they were now seen as scholars and, important assets of the empire. The other thing is, Robert Fortune was still very different from other botanists, scholars, important assets of the empire, because these men often came from money, and to take up a profession it's not for making money, and then it's not a gentlemanly thing to do. To work for money.
And that's true there. It's true in
probably today.
But I mean, it's true also. I mean, China felt the same way, right? Like if you're a merchant or you're some sort of tradesman, that's much lower than like a noble or a farmer or something, right?
Yes.
It's like, you deal with money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the book For All the Tea in China wrote about botanists in the 19th century. Quote, people without independence have no business meddling with science. It should never be linked with lucre.
So like mean, when you say independence, you mean financial independence.
Financial independence. Yeah. Meaning that they are large, vast amount of money so that they can be seen as an independent person, man in society.
They're just doing it for fun.
Yeah, exactly. His first trip was a 3-year mission to just study and collect plants in general and ship them back to Britain for the Royal Society, starting in 1843. Shortly after the Treaty of Nanjing had been signed and ports opened in China to the west. Before he went for the first time, though, they gave him a pretty small yearly wage, and they didn't want to equip him with any firearms. And it was common at the time, if you were sent people in China, especially from these royal societies, you would give them a good stipend and you will give them some means to protect themselves. It's a mysterious country where the dragons are, or where their dragons be, or whatever.
Yeah.
And when he asked for a raise and for firearms, the society first said, quote, the return of your mission ought to be but a secondary consideration. They also said, quote, the distinction and status which you could not have attained any other way, quote, meaning that you should just,
you peasant.
You know how much of an honor we're sending a man who didn't have like Lord in front of his name? And even though his fellow professional botanists were sympathetic, the fact remained that, quote, when gentlemen plant hunters needed guns, they had the independent means with which to purchase them.
Yeah, like if you got to go shoot a panda.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can afford your own guns.
Yeah. So eventually, the society gave in and gave him some firearms for protection, but no raise. Off he went, and the 3 years was a big success. He collected plants, he collected seeds, he studied them, categorized them, sent them back to the empire, to the gardens. And he had some good adventures as well when he traveled around China. Famously, once he was on a fishing boat and they were robbed by pirates. And he supposedly, in his own account, led the Chinese sailors and scared the pirates away by dressing the Chinese sailors up as foreigners and making them seem more powerful than they really were. And the firearms definitely helped.
This is some Three Kingdoms.
I know.
Stuff right here.
Right?
Well, I think it's funny though, because it's like, like if you can, I mean, obviously a lot of these seeds and flowers and stuff are going to be ornamental, but a lot of them are going to be products, right? And if you
100%.
if you can get them back and then you can plant them on a plantation in one of your colonies, now you've suddenly created a monopoly on some good.
This is when I want to talk about botanical gardens, when I change your mind about the innocent botanical gardens. So at this time, there were about 30 British domestic and colonial botanical gardens all over the world. It was a network. It might be an informal network.
I think a lot of them are probably in people's houses, right? Like manors and stuff, or were they like...
No, they were funded and under the jurisdiction of the colonial governments.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
They were actual royal gardens.
Okay.
And botanical gardens, there's this paper written by Lucille H. Brockway called Science and Colonial Expansion, the Role of the British Royal Botanical Gardens. Very interesting.
Okay.
I'll list it on below. But they said, quote, botanical gardens have contributed significantly to the colonial expansion of the West through active participation in the transfer of protected plants and their scientific development as plantation crops for the tropical colonies of the mother country. Cinchona, rubber, and sisal were prime examples.
You can't, there's no way to store this stuff unless you just keep growing it and cultivating it. So they spread it all around and then they decide, we want to grow this crop in, Jamaica, I don't know, or
no,
someplace.
these were national labs.
Yeah.
The equivalent of what we have, national laboratories. And
Yeah.
they study them and they come up with they're quote unquote scientists, botanists, working in each and one of them. And they figure out ways to cultivate them. They figure out ways to which species to pick.
Yeah, what climates are good for them. And
Exactly. At the beginning of the industrial era, botanical knowledge and the technicals of cultivating these plants was very essential before synthetic substitutes for raw materials came about from the rise of the chemical industry.
Yeah.
And the botanical gardens, they were so important because the botanists, such as Robert Fortune on this trip, they first find the plants anywhere in the world, colony or not, and they discover this might be useful. And they improve, in the labs, they improve the plant in the botanical gardens.
Yeah.
They improve this plant through species selection, hybridization, and other methods of cultivation. And then they figure out where to cultivate the plant. And almost all of the time, they find colonial lands with cheap colonial laborers to go with it.
Yeah.
If not slavery.
Or they might get a new colony and they go, actually, we need something
need to
in this
take that
temperature
one.
range, and they go
high
grab
mountains.
Yeah.
Himalaya, which turned out to be great for tea. And then they figure out how to process this plant for the international market. And then, obviously, all of this process was an essential part of making a colony or multiple colonies a success. Because then it becomes a viable and profitable part of the empire.
Well, that's, the Tanzania episode. One of the problems that Germany had is this was one of their first rodeos, and they just they didn't know what to grow there, right?
Yeah.
And they're just kind of trying to figure stuff out. But I never thought about botanical gardens that way. But the UK, they're tapping into this kind of biological, data bank.
Yes.
Where they already know exactly what they can grow in every climate and soil type and rainfall and all that.
Yes, and their jobs, the botanists, you're right, get sent out that studies in the labs. Again, gardens. I guess they didn't call them labs, greenhouses, right? They were charged with suggesting how newly discovered plants from colonies could be exploited for the Western market. They're not just there to figure out if this orchid is going to be pretty.
Yeah.
Or is going to grow in the spring. Of course they did, because that's also financially very lucrative.
Yeah.
Because the British high society loved ornamental plants. But really their most important job is how, catch crops can be improved and how industrialized they could be.
Yeah.
And
because before, I guess, like you said, synthetic materials and stuff, it's like a plantation is almost like a chemical factory, right? Or like a mine, right?
Yes.
It creates raw materials.
Exactly. Right? So I have some examples later, but let's talk about tea first, because before we get away with it. So Robert Fortune, after he came back from the first time, he wrote a book detailing his Chinese trip called 3 Years Wanderings in the Northern Provinces of China, which apparently was a common thing to do after you've been back from the Orient. You're a gentleman, you read a book.
Yeah,
he's almost a gentleman.
Yeah.
And it was it was very popular.
Yeah.
And even on the first trip, he already traveled in Chinese clothes. He shaved his head. He had a wig on a lot of the times with the braid. And he thought he really had fooled everyone. I mean, he must have fooled some people. And apparently his fellow British even took a second to recognize him after he showed up in his Chinese disguise. And even on this trip, he already made some observations and notes of how tea was planted, harvested, and processed, because throughout his travel, he encountered them and maybe he seeked them out. But because of that, he was the man when the East India Company decided, 1849, we got to send someone else to China. That's a botanist. That's not just an employee, to actually get some real seeds and real knowledge about tea themselves. And he eventually got 20,000 tea plants to India. And he hired 8 Chinese tea experts to travel with him to purchase equipments for processing this tea. And he did a very good job. And I don't really want to get into too much detail into this part, because I don't want to glorify the trip.
Yeah.
And this was international espionage by my account and by many others.
Yeah.
There will be many that tell you also that it's not, particularly the British tea companies that had benefited from this period that still exists today. But this trip, the details of it, widely available on the internet. You can look it up. So all this stuff is now in India, and East Indian Company was figuring it out, how to do it. And eventually it was a success. Robert Fortune himself, went back to China again for a third time between 1853 and 1856. And you know who he went for this time?
Who?
United States.
Ooh, okay. What do we want?
He was hired by the United States to help America start its own tea industry.
Oh, okay.
But the plan was abandoned. It didn't come to fruition because of the American Civil War that broke out shortly after, I think 6 years after he left China.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, 1860.
Yeah. And, obviously, this wasn't that long ago, but back in the days, things were happening at a bit slower rate.
Yeah.
It takes more than one or a few years to get an industry going. Eventually, in 1888, finally, for the first time, Britain imported more tea from India than China. And another caveat was, I was thinking, because if you think about American tea, the Boston Tea Party, obviously, first come to mind. And that was 1773. So they were dumping Chinese teas when they were arguing taxation without representation. It was Chinese tea sold by the British to America.
Well, the big sticking note was that basically all imports to the United States had to go through the UK first.
Yeah.
So it was, there was extra taxes on it going through the UK. And obviously, once the revolution happened, the US was buying lots of Chinese tea too, right?
Yeah.
It's competition.
Yeah, exactly. So again, it's not, I know I complained about how could British people think this is their national symbol if they don't even know how it's made?
Yeah.
But it's way more than that. It's, it's more about the financial interests and global trade.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just about British people drinking tea. It's about British people selling the tea that they have gotten from China, but hopefully soon from India.
And I also I was thinking about this, it almost feels like an early example of like branding.
Yeah.
Of like you're taking a commodity and through a process of like how you're selling it and how you're marketing it, you're turning it into like a branded good.
Yeah.
And so, tea is one thing, but then the East India Company, like their kind of official, branded tea and selling it through their channels, it does kind of turn it into a British
product
thing, right? Yeah. In the same way, if you go buy a pants at the Gap and, you think it's an American store, American brand, even, or Levi's.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Is American blue jeans, but it's,
the American, I know it's made in,
yeah, it's made somewhere else.
Elsewhere.
Yeah.
But the American
sale and marketing of it
are getting the money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not the sale and marketing of it, but it's owned. It's essentially just like these plants, which we'll talk about in a second. And so that's how the tea monopoly of China had ended.
It was broken.
Had been broken, exactly. And I want to talk about another plant that is not tea and really doesn't have that much to do with China, but I think it really speaks to botanical imperialism.
Okay.
If that's okay. Allow me to deviate away from Chinese characteristics for once.
Okay.
So I want to talk about the rubber plant.
Oh, rubber. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, big one, right? And probably no smaller industry than tea, really. And happened much later.
Probably a much crueler industry than tea.
Oh, yeah. It's everywhere.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
But, we're going to talk about one aspect of it at a particular time, which was rubber taken from Latin America to be grown as an important commercial crop in the Asian colonies. And this process was basically aided by the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew near London.
Okay.
So the rubber plant of Malaysia, it was developed from the seeds of white Brazilian rubber, and that was smuggled to Asia for development by Britain in their colonial possessions. At the beginning of the 20th century, 98% of the world's rubber came from Latin America. And rubber, indigenous people there have used the latex from trees and shrubs using the smoke ball methods for a long time. They knew how to produce it, but not on an industrial level.
Yeah.
And rubber was used in the 19th century Europe and the US and all over the world for lots of things. It was rainwear, it was machine belts, it was electrical insulation, bicycle, car tires, war machines.
Yeah.
Henry Wickman, the Robert Fortune in this case, also a plant collector under the employment of Kew Gardens and the India office of the British government. I think maybe, the East India Company was out at this time.
Yeah, India became a royal colony, I think, in like 1860 something.
Yes. So he smuggled over 70,000 seeds illegally out of Brazil. It might not have been illegal for him to buy it locally. The apologists argue that he couldn't have gotten 70,000 seeds if people didn't want to sell it to him. But it's not a matter of that. Of course, individuals will sell it. Just like maybe Robert Fortune could have gotten tea as a Chinese person buying tea seeds.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like we couldn't have sold them all that opium if they weren't buying it.
No, exactly. It's not about that. Yeah. So he had to smuggle them out, and he brought them over first to London, From there, germinated seedlings, young trees, really, were sent to Ceylon, which is Sri Lanka today, and then Singapore, and then dispatched and planted in Kuala Kangsar, Perak, current-day Malaysia, had the ideal climate and soil for the rubber trees. And not to mention, maybe more importantly, lots of free land for the empire.
Yeah.
And 19 years later, in 1896, the first rubber plantation in Malaysia was established. And it grew from there. And today, current day, modern day, it's still a prominent industry in Malaysia. But back in the 20th century, the real benefits all went to Europe. Just like you said, Levi's jeans may be made somewhere else.
Yeah.
The real benefits, the really people who are making the most of the money from it, are the people who owns the industry, who owns the brand.
Yeah.
And this whole process, the transportation of the 70,000 seeds, went to London, went to Sri Lanka, went to Singapore. This all happened. It all happened in Royal Botanical Gardens.
It was making me think of, like, you see these missions, or like, even like Charles Darwin going to the Galapagos Islands, or like different things, and you're like, oh wow, it's so great, they brought back all the plants, but really it's almost like a prospector from Exxon Mobil.
Yeah.
Or like,
that's what they were doing.
Or like Shell,
Yes.
or British Petroleum,
Yes.
going, and they're like, oh yeah, we can use that, we'll drill there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we'll tap that for natural gas.
Yes. And about Charles Darwin, I just want to mention,
Yeah.
I know he's great. He had all these contributions. He was also a rich gentleman who didn't need science as a job. It was just a hobby that he was doing.
Yeah.
Some might think it's more honorable that he was doing it, but really it's...
You're allowed to get richer while you're doing the science, but you
Yes.
should already be rich.
Yeah.
Is the
You
goal.
just cannot get into the game if you're poor. So there are gatekeepers.
Well, maybe Robert Fortune, his name helped him.
Maybe it did.
Yeah.
Maybe it did. So by 1915, Malaysia had, I'm supposed to call it Malaya at the time, but I'm going to call it Malaysia. Okay. Had over 703,000 acres of these rubber trees. By 1919, the Brazilian market was dead. And it was a national industry. And this had killed it through stealing.
Yeah.
And by 1930s, Malaysia produced half of world's rubber. And most of the rubber came from British, Dutch, and French plantations in Southeast Asia overall. So who was reaping the benefits? Not Malaysia. Lots of Malaysian Chinese and Indians are descendants of laborers that were brought over to work on the rubber plantations at this time. And the plantations was owned by Europeans, and Malaysia became, as a result, a very, very lucrative colony, and strategically also very important and useful, because rubber, if not more than tea, was a strategic resource.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why Japan invaded those places.
And after independence, many of the plantations were turned over to Malaysian hands, and some were converted to palm oil plantations. The royal garden in the center of this whole plot is called the Kew. It's still there today. If you go on their website, it's so wholesome. But there was a I wanted to read over the history logs of the Kew Garden.
Yeah.
On their own website, and two things I noticed is only in 1896 women were first employed as gardeners at the Kew, and in 1913 suffragettes attacked Glass House and burned down Kew's tea pavilion. 2 were jailed. Great job. So
Suffragists were angry in the UK.
They were, but I would like to say, you know what? All these plotting, all this stealing, all this espionage, women just weren't part of it because they weren't hiring any women.
Well,
yeah?
unless it's pandas.
Unless it's pandas.
Because they have a woman's touch. They have a mother's touch.
They have a mother's touch to raise a baby panda. Exactly. So if you have listened to our panda episode, I recommend it. That would make a little more sense. But sorry about the ones who first tuned in. So yeah. So that was how tea was stolen from China. That was how rubber was stolen from Brazil and Latin America, and how botanical gardens aren't so innocent. And again, I'm not saying that I'm not supporting their missions today, which is all the wholesome stuff.
I don't think you can blame the Denver Botanical Gardens.
I'm not blaming the Denver.
How old could the Denver?
No, I love the Denver Botanical Garden. It was so fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, including the little Japanese garden they had,
Yeah.
or Chinese garden they had, East Asian garden they had.
Multicultural fusion.
Yes. I think the thing about empiring is that every aspect of society was a result of that, or was an instrument of that.
Okay. You mean, obviously empire, you're like imperialism? gonna go do some empiring.
Well,
Yeah, I guess it means the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Is that not a word that people use?
I don't know.
I will never see a botanical garden that, I mean, I guess I will. I like them today.
Yeah.
But lots of them, especially the royal ones, the British royal ones, had dark histories. And they might thought they were doing people's work. They might thought they were doing, which, I mean, I guess they moved forward science, but at the cost of colonies and exploited colonial labor
and also
other countries' expenses.
Yeah, destroying other people's economies by stealing it and mass producing it.
Exactly. So that's the episode.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you feel like you see botanical gardens differently now? I'm not sure I want you to, but
yeah, I think it's because obviously we think of now of like a garden and it's like it's just ornamental and like fancy.
Yeah.
We don't think of it like a Monsanto like genetically engineered.
No, but these were natural resources.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of 200 years ago, very, very important. Before you had synthetic materials. Mm-hmm. And lots of things, I mean, even today, some things cannot be replaced by synthetic materials. But back in the days, even more so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or like even like certain like kinds of like drugs, like, that you like quinine was it's the thing in gin and tonic that prevents against malaria.
Okay.
Stuff like that
Where did it come from?
It originally came from a plant.
Okay.
And then they figured out I think they maybe figured out how to synthesize it.
Yeah.
Either that or they just grew a lot of the plant.
Right.
But like, these things they help you continue the engine of colonialization, right?
Yeah.
To feed it all.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to speak to the point when you said, like Charles Darwin and all these royal men, or, like high class men who are allowed to get richer from science.
Yeah.
Just like empires and their colonies. Once you have one, you grow from there, and you use and exploit the colonies you already have to continue and grow and exploit more.
Yeah, like we talked about Tanzania. I mean, they would use administrators from India.
Yeah.
Well,
they use laborers from
colonies.
India to go to send to Malaysia.
Yeah, right.
For the rubber trees. Mm-hmm. I don't think they were sending British people to Malaysia to plant in the plantations. So,
no.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully that was interesting to people. I think we've got our next 2 episodes. Please look forward to them because I think they're going to be fun.
This was fun.
Well, they're going to be, I think,
more fun.
More fun.
Wow. Okay.
So kind of like holiday episodes.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So look forward to that, and thank you for everybody who listens. And if you rated us on whatever podcast platform you listen to us on, we really appreciate it. And I guess stay safe.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.